Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and today's program, the US President Donald Trump announces that Israel and Hamas have agreed on the first phase of his plan to end the war in Gaza, an announcement that has been welcomed across the world. Well, the deal paves the way for a ceasefire, for Israeli hostages to be released, for Palestinian prisoners to be freed, for Israeli troops to withdraw, and for aid deliveries to Gaza to be stepped up. We ask, could this also pave the way for a permanent solution and the establishment of a Palestinian state? We're joined now by Mike Pompeo, the former US Secretary of State and former director of the CIA under President Trump. But thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Always a pleasure talking to you. Israel and Hamas have now signed off on the first phase of President Trump's peace plan. What was your initial reaction to this news?
Well, it's remarkable. It's historic. It's still 72 hours away. Still things that can jump in the middle of this and cause problems. But the fact that we're going to get 20 hostages out of Gaza, we're going to get the remains of another 24 or so back to their families is a joyous thing. The fact that they've had to release a bunch of folks who committed crimes, hundreds of folks who are being held by the Israelis today who have been convicted through due process, doesn't make this an equal trade. But my first reaction was it is time for these hostages to return to their families. Right now, 2 years and a day and a half from when they were taken on October 7th, 2 years ago, a great and glorious outcome. Sure, and obviously, and you sort of allude to it there, sticking points remain and a lot could happen. I mean, there's this sticking point of Hamas saying it will only lay down its weapons once a Palestinian state is established. I mean, how do you see negotiators addressing that and getting around that key stumbling block? Well, this isn't a new problem, right? This is Hamas handing over these hostages, not because they've become citizens of the world, but because they've had enormous pressure applied against them. And because the Israelis and President Trump and the Americans put enormous pressure on Iran with what they did this past summer, taking out a significant piece of the Iranian nuclear weapons program, the near dismantlement of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the pressure on the Houthis, all of that brought us to this moment. It doesn't mean for a moment that the resistance in Hamas won't remain. Right? It's a resistance movement. Their objective is the destruction of the nation of Israel. And so lots of work left to be done in the aftermath of these hostages being returned. Lots of work to be done to disarm Hamas, to create a civil government. And those two elements are most important to the civilians living in Gaza. The most important people who benefit most from the Israelis' ability to withdraw safely and continue to protect their own sovereign territory, and to get Hamas out of governance, get the armed resistance eliminated, are the people who are living in Gaza who have suffered so much over these past months as a direct result of what the terrorists did there. I think there's a lot of celebration around the world that this bloody chapter in modern history, could be over. And I think a lot of people are getting ahead of themselves, perhaps talking already about a two-state solution. But does it feel like today we are a step closer to a two-state solution than perhaps we were 24 hours ago? Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, but it's a small step. And the trail is littered with history. We know this from when Arafat was in charge. Right? We all know the history, that this gets complicated as soon as you get into the details. In the end, you have to change the nature of the leadership. The leadership has to ultimately come to recognize Israel's right to exist. And we saw that with the Abraham Accords. We saw the Emiratis agree to it. We saw the Sudanese. We saw the Bahrainis, right? Those nations they said, we are no longer going to have as a central principle the destruction of the nation of Israel. And to the extent Lebanon can do that, Syria can do that under their new leadership, to the extent we can find a political solution in Gaza, then you can begin to build out a model that looks like a just and stable and near permanent peace in the region, which would be a fantastic outcome. But there's a lot of work left to do. And you can see from the statements coming out from various parties, who assert they represent Hamas. It's not at all clear exactly who Hamas's leadership will be 2 months or 2 years from now. You can see those leaders already beginning to hedge their bets because they know too that the resistance is the reason for their existence. Their entire enterprise revolves around continuing armed conflict against Israel. So your point is well taken. A lot of work remains to be done to get what we hope is a step towards a sustainable outcome.
In terms of President Trump's approach to this 8 or 9 decades old problem, what we've seen the last couple of weeks is markedly different from what President Trump was talking about earlier in the year when he talked about a Gaza Riviera, which would require 2 million people being sent into exile. What do you make of the evolution of President Trump's approach to this issue? And do you think the Gaza Riviera plan was part of a broader negotiating tactic?
You know, I always watch President Trump's actions closely, right? He has been remarkably consistent on this file in the Middle East since I was his Secretary of State in his first term. We have a great, reliable partner in Israel. We want good things for the Palestinian people that are living both in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. We want good things for them, but we're not going to allow them to stand in the way of a broader peace. And so we, in the first term, the Gulf Arab states were great partners for America. They continue to be. Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed in the Emirates, the leadership, the Crown Prince in Bahrain are all great partners of the United States. And so, you know, in Gaza, President Trump has made clear he was going to allow Israel to do the work necessary to get these hostages home and to give Israel all the capability they needed to go take down Hamas so that it no longer threatened the nation of Israel. Those pillars have been incredibly consistent. And then you can see, as part of this plan, this 20-point plan, you can see a plan towards political governance not connected to Hamas. And second, a theory of the case on how you're going to rebuild Gaza and make it a peaceful, livable place for the civilians that live there. That's been his mission. When he talks about, Gaza, on the Trump on the Mediterranean, all the Trump Tower stuff, a lot of that was theatrics that the media brought on. President Trump has been remarkably consistent here.
These were, of course, not direct talks that took place in Sharm el-Sheikh. Lots of parties were involved. From the US side, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and, of course, senior officials from Qatar, from Egypt, from Turkey. Do you think there was anything or anyone that stands out as having been a winning ingredient or a winning player to bringing us to the point we're at today?
Oh, goodness. No, I think lots of credit, and President Trump said this, right? It took many nations coming together and many leaders who were very bold. The Egyptian folks did great work in hosting this. Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner obviously lent America's authority and power and certainty to the transaction as well, but brought together the Gulf Arab states, the Emiratis, the Saudis. Everyone signed off on this, the Qataris, the Turks. That's a remarkable act of diplomacy. It's a really good outcome. And so I don't know that there's any one individual, but lots of leaders who worked tirelessly to get an outcome that gets us at least a point where those hostages can be returned home.
Do you think we have here in front of us the blueprint for perhaps solving other conflicts, as some geopolitical analysts have suggested?
I think the whole world will be watching what President Trump did in the Middle East. He gave the Iranians space. He told them there was a deadline, and when they didn't comply with the deadline, he took a strike and decimated their nuclear program. I think for Xi Jinping or for Chairman Kim or for the Ayatollah himself in Iran or for even Vladimir Putin in Europe, I think they can see that, the storyline somehow that President Trump is an isolationist president who puts America first and ignores the rest of the world is belied by the actions that President Trump and his administration have taken. I think that was true in his first term. I think it's equally true in this one. He is judicious in how we use American power, but he understands America's best interests are creating peace and stability in these regions. Certainly where we have friends and partners, we're going to do everything America can do to deliver those outcomes. And I do think that others will have observed this, and I hope we'll adopt something that looks like this, recognizing that America remains the most preeminent power in the world, and it's prepared to use its good offices to deliver great outcomes for not only America, putting America first, but for the world.
Clearly, the president has put a huge amount of energy into this old issue between the Palestinians and the Israelis. If he can solve it once and for all and bring about a lasting solution, how do you think he's going to go down in US history?
Oh, how many presidents have we had try to accomplish just that? I can go back a long ways, almost since the Nation of Israel's founding. So yeah, to the extent we get something that's the accomplishment of getting these hostages home is good. But if we get something more than that, we get a delivered outcome that looks like a just and lasting peace. I think President Trump and frankly all of the leadership in the region will go down in history as having delivered an amazing outcome for mankind.
And just lastly, Mr. Pompeo, do you think President Trump is deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize?
Oh, I'll leave that to the Nobel Committee. They can sort through it. But if you ask, if we get a just and lasting peace in the Middle East that fundamentally reshapes that region and keeps our young boys, our American young boys' lives from being at risk and the lives of citizens all across the region, from Kuwait to Oman to the Emirates, if we get that just and lasting peace, it will be an historic achievement, certainly worthy not only of a Nobel Prize, but worthy of accolades from people all across the world. It's not about a particular trophy. It's about delivering the peace, and I pray that it's the case that this is a good first step towards achieving that.
Okay, Mike Pompeo, former U.S. Secretary of State. Thank you very much indeed for speaking.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Well, we can speak now to Ambassador Dr. Omar Awad-Allah, who is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Palestinian Authority. He joins us now from Ramallah. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, what I'm sure is a very busy day for you. A lot has happened. I just want to ask you whether you anticipated that a deal would indeed be reached, or did this news take you by surprise?
Thank you for having me. No, we are optimistic. We were optimistic that the deal will happen because we've been waiting for this moment for 2 years. That is our priority, to halt and to stop this war immediately, and now we have it, to stop the famine, man-made famine by Israel, and to stop the forcible transfer, and to protect our people, including the release of the prisoners and the captives in a way or another. So I think we were optimistic, and we were ready for this moment and looking forward. We felt that with the presence of all those in Sharm el-Sheikh, especially our brothers in Egypt, adding to this the Prime Minister of Qatar, the head of intelligence from Turkey, adding to this to Mr. Wotkov and Kushner, we thought and we knew that the deal will be there.
Indeed, and as you mentioned, a lot of parties were involved. You mentioned some of the people there: Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, senior officials from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey. You haven't mentioned the Hamas chief negotiator, Khalil al-Hayya, who, of course, was the target of an assassination attempt by Israel in Doha last month. I mean, he must have been under enormous pressure. I mean, given this climate of mistrust, negotiating, albeit indirectly, with people who try to assassinate you. I mean, how do you think he got on?
Actually, as I said, I'm not a spokesperson of Hamas, but nonetheless, what Israel did by attacking Qatar is a violation of international law, and for sure, all those who went to negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Egypt, direct or indirect, they did not conduct these negotiations because they trust Netanyahu and his team. They went because the Americans are the guarantor. The plan is American. The American representation is there. The mediator, the main mediator, is the American. And we think that we all were looking at this deal because the Americans are there, and they are going to impose on Israel the conditions and to accept the deal that Mr. Trump came up. No one is there because of Israel or they trust Israel or they have good relations with Israel. No one trusts Netanyahu and his team because they broke the deal before, unfortunately, at the beginning of this year. So the idea is about the genuine process and efforts by the American administration and mainly the President of the United States. That's why the teams are there in Sharm el-Sheikh, not because Netanyahu is a man of trust or a man of his word.
Let's talk a bit about your vision for all the Palestinian territories, Gaza included. I mean, there is this plan for a technocratic Palestinian committee who will hand over power to the Palestinian authorities. What's your vision for how Gaza will be governed in the future?
You know, actually, we had our vision since the day one. This is a Palestinian territory. Those are our people. The cause is Palestinian. We are the sole representative of the Palestinian people. We had our plan. The plan became an Egyptian-Palestinian plan. Then it became the Arab-Islamic plan for recovery and reconstruction of Gaza. We added to that the governance and the security aspect for the governing Gaza and to provide services to Gaza. We've been providing all the services to Gaza and exclusively actually in water, education, energy, health, all relief. All of this is our duty as a Palestinian government. So now we're talking about the technocratic committee that is under the Palestinian Authority with the help and with the direct connection with the legitimate Palestinian representative of the Palestinian people, which is the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. So this technocratic government, we will ask for an international stabilization mission to assess us and to support our security and our governmental body in Gaza up until we have the ability to rule and to have the security fully in Gaza Strip by the invitation of the Palestinian government, by the invitation of the Security Council. We will be calling for this mission to assist the Palestinians to stabilize the situation in Gaza Strip because now there is a lot of need while there is all the infrastructure is destroyed. There is no place to stay. A lot of things need to be done. So this is technocratic or administrative committee that can be established after the ceasefire, and now we have the ceasefire, so we can discuss the names of those technocratic personnel. And the Arab Islamic plan itself, it has this aspect in it. So nothing new. We were ready for this, and we're ready for the day after, actually, after all of this, because this is only the beginning toward reunifying Gaza with the West Bank under the legitimate authority of the Palestinian leadership. Adding to this, we will go for elections. Adding to this, we will be talking about implementing New York Declaration, about the implementation of the two-state solution, where we have the state of Palestine and the rights of the Palestinian people to be implemented and materialized.
Yeah, and Dr. Awad-Allah, you just raised a point there, and I want to ask you, does it feel like today we're a step closer towards a two-state solution than we did yesterday?
I think yes, and this we can add the plan of Mr. Trump to all the old efforts and all initiatives, including the recognitions, including the New York Declaration, the conference about the peaceful settlements of the question of Palestine. This initiative by the American president can be part of all these efforts toward implementing the two-state solution. And adding to this, that the declaration itself, New York Declaration, it was clear about the need of the end of the war, the end of the aggression, to start the political path toward the two-state solution, which is implementing the state of Palestine and having the rights of the Palestinian people as prerequisite for peace and security in the region.
Okay, and in 10 seconds, Dr. Awad-Allah, would you support the nomination of President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize?
If the question of Palestine resolved and we have the state of Palestine and all our people are protected from the Israeli aggression, we can nominate him if he do this as a matter of peace and security and prosperity for all in the region.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Dr. Omar Awad-Allah. Thank you very much for your time. Well, we're joined now by Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. I'd just like to start by asking a very basic question, but what was your initial reaction when you got the news that this deal had been reached?
A great joy. Just joy and relief. Something that I haven't felt for the last 2 years.
I mean, it's a ceasefire, isn't it? It's not a peace deal. But are you confident that this will pave the way to an end to the war?
Well, that's the deal is not a peace treaty. We are far from it. This is just end of the war and return the hostages and release the prisoners and starting to pull out from Gaza. And this is what I was preaching for and campaigning for in the last more than a year. So I'm very happy that we are at the beginning of something that can be of great development towards perhaps a new era in our region. But it's the very beginning.
We understand that the US envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner are heading to Israel today. What sort of a welcome do you think they're going to get there?
Well, I guess that we will be very grateful. We are very grateful. The efforts that were made by them and primarily by President Trump is certainly unusual. It's extraordinary. I don't remember a president of the United States being so deeply involved almost day and night for such a long time to try and bring some relief, some change into the very painful lives of so many people.
These were, of course, not direct talks that were held in Sharm el-Sheikh. They were indirect talks. We've mentioned Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, but there were also senior officials from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, to name some of the other countries. I mean, does any one person or any one country stand out in your mind as having played a really pivotal role?
Certainly, all of the ones you mentioned, the Egyptians, the Turks, the Qataris, contributed a great deal, and we have to be grateful to them as well. But there is no question that it depended entirely on one person, Donald J. Trump. He was the one that had the power to make this happen. And we have been waiting quite a long time, I have to say. I thought, I said it on the day that he was elected, that he's the only person on earth that can force this change. It took time because of many different circumstances, but the outcome at the end seems to be very successful, which is that the war is ended, and the hostages that we are so much waiting for are going to come back within 2-3 days, and that there will be no more bombings and no more attacks and no more people killed on both sides, on our side, on the Palestinian side.
We've had about 10 days to get used to the 20-point deal that President Trump put forward. And when we first saw it and we analyzed it with experts, people said it's very simple and there's a lot of detail missing. But do you think this deal succeeded where perhaps others did not because of that simplicity? Do you think that was its main asset?
Well, let's face it. The truth is that the thing was very simple from the beginning. It was very simple. We had to stop the war, and they had to bring back the hostages. The rest is outcome of this. And the only person that had the power to force us to stop the war and to force them to bring the hostages back is Donald Trump. And in order to achieve it, he had to use all the power that he possesses as President of the United States of America, and as someone that the Israeli Prime Minister completely depends on, as we know, to just say, as I advised him on many different occasions, perhaps including in some of the interviews in your channel, when I said what Trump needs to do is to summon Netanyahu into the Oval Office and to say to him, Bibi, enough is enough. That's the end of it. And to say, of course, to the Palestinians what he had to say. And finally, he did it. And, you know, while we can always ask why he didn't do it a year ago or half a year ago, it doesn't matter now that he has done it, and it seems to actually take place. And therefore, when Witkoff, who dedicated so much of his time and energies and the ability and leadership to bring the two sides to this point, is admirable, and so is Jared Kushner, and so all the others that participated. But at the end of the day, this is one person.
How do you think the hardliners in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition are feeling today?
Well, I hope that they feel bad, and I hope that they will resign from the cabinet as soon as possible.
Could they bring the cabinet down, do you think?
I don't know. The cabinet has been postponed now. The session of the cabinet has been postponed. I mean, it was already had to take place some time ago, and now I understand that it will take place at 8 o'clock. I think it's done. It's irreversible in this respect. I mean, they have to decide whether they want to stay in the cabinet or resign. I hope they will resign.
Do you think, I mean, looking at these last few months, I mean, so much has happened with regards to the situation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And one of the things that's happened in the last few weeks really is that long list of countries that recognized a Palestinian state. Do you think that changed something? Do you think that was, you know, a deal breaker in some respects with regards to getting us to the point we're at today?
I'm sure you know that I've been supporting and campaigning and working in order to share my conviction that the only possible comprehensive permanent solution for the historic conflict between us and the Palestinians is a two-state solution. The Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel on the basis of the 67 borders with all the other parts which I've outlined and repeatedly said time and again. And I think that this is the first step towards it. Of course, what we need is the next step. But first of all, we have to make sure that this is accomplished, that the army has stopped the fighting, the Israeli military units are starting to withdraw into the new line, and that the hostages are returned safely, live and dead, back to Israel. Then, of course, it will not be able to remain where it will be. We have to carry on. Otherwise, after a certain period of time, the skirmishes and the confrontations and the occasional shooting from one side to the other side can break everything. So what is done today is the beginning of what may turn out to be an historic point in the history of the Middle East. Now, the positions of the European countries, France and Germany and Great Britain and Canada and others, was helpful in a sense that they keep reminding us that end of the war is just the beginning, is not the end. It's the beginning of something that has to develop. However, without the efforts that were made by President Trump, it may have not changed anything. So we have to recognize and respect the efforts of the European countries, President Macron and Prime Minister Sturmer and Prime Minister Carney and Meloni and Chancellor Marz and all the others. But without the involvement, the assistance, the efforts, the pressure, the leadership of President Trump, it may have not happened.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's looked quite vulnerable at numerous stages in the last few years. And of course, this situation in Gaza has meant he's been under an enormous amount of pressure domestically from within his own coalition and internationally. Do you think the release of the hostages and perhaps where we're about to arrive at now, this next stage, and perhaps moving towards a longer-term solution, does this give him a boost? Do you think he looks like he's in a stronger position now?
Well, I'm not certain about that because I'm not certain that he is particularly interested in a long-range solution of the kind that I'm talking about. He kept saying all the time that he will never support the creation of a Palestinian state. Without a Palestinian state, there will not be a solution. It must be clear. No, I think that he is not necessarily going to be stronger. He perhaps is losing the faith of his supporters on the Messianic groups in his cabinet. And I don't think that a large part of the Israeli population will be seduced now to trust Netanyahu or after what we have been going through in the last 2 years. I think that he would be very reluctant to enter into an election process soon. But at the end, it's inevitable. We will have elections in, I believe, in a short while. And at the end of this, we'll have another government.
We were talking a moment about a two-state solution and how that's your hope and your wish as an outcome from these diplomatic efforts. How far off do you think that will be now?
This is a great question because normally, wherever I go across the world, I've been through in so many different places, everyone says to me, but how can you imagine that after what happened, after the terrible, terrible, horrific, atrocious killing of innocent Israelis by the Palestinians on the one hand, and then the very aggressive reaction of Israel with so many Palestinians being killed, how can you imagine the two sides coming to some kind of terms, some kind of reconciliation? I think it's possible, and I believe that it may be sooner than most people think, because at the end of the day, what's the alternative? What are we going to do with 6 million Palestinians living in the West Bank and in Gaza? Are we going to be the occupiers forever? Is it going to change something in the emotional attitude of the Palestinians to us and us to them? No. So there must be something else. And the only possible way is a comprehensive understanding about the right of Palestinians to exercise their self-determination and for us to pull out from territories which are now occupied, most of the territories that are occupied by us in the West Bank, and in Gaza we are starting now, and we have to continue. And I think that I always remember that after the Second World War, had someone told the French and the Germans that the time will come that France and Germany will be the best of friends in the world. No one would have taken it seriously, and yet it happened sooner than most people thought it could. So I believe, but first of all, we have to believe. Then we have to work for it. Then we have to come forward and not hesitate to make every possible effort in order to understand that these are the realities. And at the end of the day, a military victory is much less significant in my mind than peace that will end wars and hostilities and bloodshed between the two sides.
Just lastly, Mr. Olmert, I mean, this is clearly a diplomatic victory for President Trump, who incidentally may visit the Middle East during the course of this weekend, including Israel, although that's not yet confirmed. Would you say that these developments of the last couple of days boost his chances of getting a Nobel Peace Prize?
How do I know? I wish I could answer you. Whether he will receive awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace or not, he will be recognized as someone that has contributed greatly to the good life of many peoples, both in Israel and amongst the Palestinians. And this is a great award which he can take with him for wherever he goes. And he still has a long way to go as President of the United States.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you very much indeed, Ehud Olmert,
Thank you.
former Prime Minister of Israel. Thank you again.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Ahmed Fattouh, who is a spokesperson for the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Once again, always a pleasure speaking to you. We're in the situation where Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of President Trump's Gaza peace deal. Crucially, the release of Israeli hostages, Palestinian prisoners, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from parts of Gaza, and the entry of aid. How do you see events unfolding over the next few days?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We are hopeful that this would lead into a longer process that would lead to a perpetual peace, to a lasting peace that would recognize the Palestinian rights of self-determination and independence. Of course, there are many steps that need to be taken first, from releasing the hostages, swapping with the prisoners, and reconstruction of Gaza, the withdrawal of the Israeli occupation. These technical parts need to take place now, and we are hopeful that it will be finished within a week. Then to go to the more serious process and stage 2, which should discuss the permanent solution and the resolution to the question of Palestine, which should be within the two-state solution and the United Nations resolutions. So we are hopeful this have stopped the genocide and stopped the killing, and now we look forward that this would also bring more prosperity and security to the region.
Does it look to you like the hard part is still ahead of us, or do you think we could say that, do you think there's an argument that the hard part is now behind us because the momentum is there, the spirit is there for the negotiations to move on to the next stage? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's still many points that is very sensitive and that need to be discussed. It hasn't been mentioned, and I think that would require more political dialogue or diplomatic dialogue and more negotiations and direct negotiations within the main two parts, which is the Palestinian state and the Israeli state, with the existence of mediators, of course. Until now, there's no direct talks. Now, but most importantly, the first priority right now is to stop genocide, and I believe now the foreign minister of Israel has called that Israel will not remake the war or declare the war. So we are hopeful that they are serious and committed to Trump plan, and they will abide with the international law this time and don't break it like the last time in January. But we rely heavily on the international community and on our partners in the region, in the Arab world, and on the solidarity movement around the world to pressure more until to achieve the two-state solution in its full sense, not a way that suits the far right of Israeli government that don't want a Palestinian state, don't want anything about Palestine. So we are hopeful that Mr. Trump is serious, and this time the United States could play a major role into making that take place. His speech lately and his post in the Truth Social says some more balanced word than before. Last post he said we look forward for a peace between the Muslim world, the Arab world, and Israel. So that indirectly means that he's looking to resolve the main issue. And when we talk about the main issue, then he is referring to the critical points of the peace deal, which would include the Palestinian state, the refugees' right of return, Jerusalem, and all of that. So I hope Mr. Trump is going to continue his pressure until we achieve these points and to reach a fair deal.
Yeah, but until then, we have a lot of, and you've mentioned this already, we have a lot of stumbling blocks that we have to address. There are a lot of potential bumps in the road. One of them is Hamas giving up its weapons. Do you think Hamas will give up its weapons?
The leaked information lately said that Hamas have accepted into an Egyptian proposition or Egyptian suggestion where they could freeze Hamas weapons within an Egyptian committee. So in other way, that's handing over their weapons to Egypt. So I believe that is a great progress. And they also have declared before that they don't want to stay in power, and this is also a positive step. And also, a required step by the Palestinian people, because this is the national unity under the PLO and the Palestinian Authority is a major demand by the Palestinian people, because we are tired from, the unilateral action that Hamas did, and now we are looking forward into a legitimate authority that would represent the consensus of the Palestinian people as a whole, not as a party. So there's positive parts. I believe there's more to discuss, of course. There's issues maybe right now between which names will be released from the Palestinian side, from the prisoner sides. I hope they would reach a breakthrough. And but all in all, the main theme, there is positivity over there, and we believe we are, just a few days before hearing good news.
Right, and as we've been saying, the momentum is there, and there are some new faces and new participants in these discussions that weren't there before, not just on the American side, but President Trump was keen to get Turkey involved. I'm just wondering whether you see the involvement of any new parties as having been the catalyst, and perhaps credit needs to be given to any one party for getting this first step over the line.
Well, the mediators played a major role. Saudi Arabia played a vital role into reviving the two-state solution. With France, they made the international conference for the two-state solution in New York. It issued a great declaration statement that reaffirmed the two-state solution, the rights of the Palestinians, as well as the major concerns of Israel of security and release of hostages. So it was a very balanced document that justify or bring justice to both cases. Also followed by the international global summit for the question of Palestine that took place in September. That was also reaffirming these basic principles. So now also there's a meeting in Paris between the main partners, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey, France. I believe Americans could participate. I'm not sure if they have committed yet, but that also come to consolidate the concept that a solution must address the major factors, which is the state of Palestine and the two-state solution. Now, the technical obstacles that they are discussing right now, I believe it could be resolved. When we are speaking about the hostage swap, the Hamas weapons, Hamas leaders leaving Gaza Strip, these are more easy to resolve, in my opinion, because Hamas has expressed their positivity into accepting these forms. So that is also a positive. And the Trump pressure on Israel to go with the peace deal is also a positive. So these first phase, we are positive or quite confident it could be successful. Now, the most important part is the second phase, when we start speaking about the reconstruction of Gaza, when we start speaking about, the sovereignty of Palestinian state and the security issues and the international forces that want to preserve peace, because that is more wide discussion, that's more complicated discussion that requires the United Nations Security Council, all the Arab partners to engage. And we have to bring the point here that the reconstruction of Gaza is going to cost hundreds of billions, and going after that requires an actual framework and comprehensive political framework that would ensure stability and peace for the long future. Otherwise, rebuilding Gaza and spending billions, then Israel to go and invade or for a war to break out, that will collapse everything and will be very costly. So I believe now there is more evidence on the ground, more points on ground that need to be taken seriously this time. And I believe Israel cannot run away from the fact that they need to recognize the Palestinian state and recognize the Palestinian independence.
What do you think about the tone and the negotiating tactics adopted by the Hamas negotiator-in-chief, Khalil al-Hayya? He said, for example, that he valued the efforts of the US President Donald Trump. I mean, that's a very conciliatory tone, and he's putting across, he's got this first stage over the line indirectly with these negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh. Do you think he's trying to reach out here to Washington and perhaps bring about a rethink on the part of the Trump administration towards Hamas?
Well, I think Hamas continue to think as a party, not as a Palestinian leadership, unfortunately. They did not incorporate the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They did not incorporate the Palestinian Authority, and that's regrettable. I'm not sure what their aims are, but we could read between the lines. Hamas, of course, are trying to find, a place in the future, maybe, or trying to make guarantees or ensure that they will not be attacked and their readers will not be targeted and their money will not be confiscated from the banks. And so they are discussing what Hamas needs, not what the Palestinian needs. And when we come to the Palestinian national issues, this need to be done with the Palestinian state, with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, with the team of negotiations that we have to discuss the major issues, the right of return, the East Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque, the water resources, and the right of refugees. All of that need to be discussed. Hamas will not discuss that, and they have said, to give them credit, that this is not their job. This is the job of the PLO, and that is correct. They will discuss the part of the hostages, and I hope that they will handle these negotiations back to the Palestinian Liberation Organizations, back to the authority, and to those who actually, are responsible for the Palestinian people. And so this is the time, I believe, that we have to reject any unilateral action by parties, the time of parties or factions by Israel to take decision and to jump into the unknown by himself and drag all the Palestinians. This is finished. Now we are looking for one state, one authority, one security force, and sovereignty over Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem.
Okay, and just lastly, Ahmed, I mean, how far off do you think a two-state solution could be? I mean, how many months, how many years could we be looking at in the best-case scenario?
It depends how much serious and committed the United States is and the international community. If you ask me, it just needs to apply the international resolutions. This is it. If we apply the international resolution, the UN resolution 2334, 242, and 181 speaks about the giving Palestine 45%. We accepted 22%. So if they apply 242, that alone would finish this issue for real. But until now, there's always have been a regression. When we reach a point that we will go into two-state solution, there's always a regression that the international community succumb to Israel's plans. And Israel look for a plan that suits Israel, does not suit the world, does not suit the Palestinians. And Israel wants hegemony, wants occupation, and want the greater Israel. They are speaking about it openly. But if the world had the commitment, we could achieve the two-state solution immediately. To withdraw from the Gaza Strip and to withdraw from West Bank, this is a matter of international law. This is a matter of legal matter. This is not a gift. So Israel have to withdraw. And when we speak about East Jerusalem, this is as defined by the international law, by history, is a Palestinian land, an occupied Palestinian territory. So Israel need to withdraw. And when we talk about governance, then the PLO is the sole representative of the Palestinian people. And we define our future. We define our destiny. We want to go for elections. Now, President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed Trump announcement for the peace and welcomed the 20-point peace plan, and also announced that we are committed to work with the international community, with the UN, and in order to achieve peace and to apply these steps further in stages until we reach that point. But it has to be within the framework of the two-state solution. It cannot be within a framework of unknown future. And I hope that the world now is in solidarity with Palestine, and the growing pressure, the growing recognition of the state of Palestine has sent a message that the world can no longer tolerate the oppression and persecution of the Palestinian people. It is time for Palestine to be independent and free and to live like all other nations in the freedom and equality. I hope this will be the future.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Ahmed Fattouh, a spokesperson for the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
We can speak now to Jasmine El-Gamal, who is a former Middle East advisor at the Pentagon, who joins us from London. Jasmine, always a pleasure speaking to you, and we've had lots of conversations over the years, but I think this might be one of the most important. I mean, very easy to forget amidst the celebrations and the sense of triumph that a deal has been reached, a ceasefire deal has been reached. The diplomacy in Sharm el-Sheikh continues. Is the hard part over, or is the hard part yet to come?
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for having me. It's always good to talk to you. I mean, really, the short answer is the hardest part is yet to come. Of course, it's extremely important to welcome this reprieve in the bombardment and the suffering and everything that we've been seeing for the last 2 years. But the hard work is really yet to come. This was a ceasefire agreement. It's not an agreement to a permanent end to the war by any means. And all of that negotiation over the future of Gaza is still going to happen. And that is going to be some of the most complicated discussions, I would say, are going to be coming up in the next several days and weeks.
I mean, the disarmament of Hamas, I mean, does that sound to you like it's going to be the most difficult of all the sticking points? There's quite a long list, isn't there?
It is a long list. I would say that Hamas's disarmament probably is one of the stickiest points on their side. I think on the Israeli side, there's a much more sort of existential question, which is whether this Israeli government, with its current composition, could ever sign a deal willingly that ends the war permanently, lets go of the idea of the annexation of Gaza and the West Bank, and commits to a future Palestinian state. All of those things that I've just mentioned are anathema to the current Israeli government, with its extreme right-wing ministers, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has so far appeased them in almost every single demand that they've made of him. They have been the reason for previous ceasefire deals falling through. They're always threatening to walk out of the government and collapse the government if Prime Minister Netanyahu commits to a permanent end to the war. So those issues are still very much on the table and have not yet been resolved on the Israeli side.
Jasmine, can you imagine a scenario in which fighting in Gaza resumes, or do you think both sides are going to stick to this deal, even if there are some bumps in the road?
All we have to go on, Tom, is past experience. And we've seen ceasefires, both in Gaza and in Lebanon, be either reneged on or violated. The ceasefire that was signed between Israel and Hamas back in January, when President Trump first came into office, and there was a spurt of diplomatic efforts to get that ceasefire signed and pressure from the Trump administration. Well, that very quickly fell apart about 2 weeks into it, when the two parties were supposed to start negotiating phase 2, which are some of those more complicated issues that we just talked about. In Lebanon, we see the ceasefire signed between those two sides being violated nearly every day. So unfortunately, the past does not give much hope for optimism, although one, of course, would always hope that this time it's different and the pressure really does remain on both sides to not only implement this deal, but to continue further negotiations over long-term issues in good faith.
Again, just lastly, I wanted to ask you, because I haven't spoken to any of our other guests about this yet, but the idea of a technocratic Palestinian committee, then the Palestinian Authority running Gaza. I mean, I just wonder what you make of these plans for post-war Gaza. What strikes you about them?
Well, this is something, obviously, that is a very much an internal Palestinian issue. I mean, this is something that Palestinians are going to have to figure out how to move forward from from here on out, what that technocratic government is going to look like, who's going to be in it, what reforms the Palestinian Authority is going to continue to make in order to eventually reunite the governance of the West Bank and Gaza. And of course, you have this overarching body that President Trump mentioned in his plan, which may or may not be run by Tony Blair. There are all of these discussions that are still underway, but at the end of the day, I have to keep coming back to the fact that this really is going to have to be an intra-Palestinian conversation and dialogue moving forward.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Always a pleasure. Jasmine El-Gamal, thank you very much indeed. Well, we can speak now to Andrew Gilmour, the former UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, who joins us from the United Kingdom. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Always a pleasure having you on the programme. What was your first reaction when you heard the news that a ceasefire and hostage deal had been struck?
Well, relief, absolutely, and kept within certain bounds, because however desperate one is for this deal to take place, there is, of course, a certain amount of skepticism involved, but definitely relief. That's certainly the primary reaction.
Yeah, that seems to be similar to what the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said today when he called this deal a glimmer of relief. I mean, he sounded a little bit sort of glass half full there in his tone. I mean, why do you think there is this skepticism?
Because, well, what we've seen so far, and the fact that we can be reasonably sure that whereas the vast majority of the international community, and certainly the Palestinians, want this to happen, there is certainly a very influential sector of Israeli opinion that does not want this to happen, and will be looking for any excuse to be able to rip up the Trump deal, actually. So there is... And of course, there is always a possibility that Palestinians of some sort will give them that excuse. And that is what we all have to be doing everything possible to ensure does not happen.
And when it comes to the negotiations, does it look to you as though the hard part is really still ahead of us?
Absolutely, because obviously there are so many things that are totally unclear as to who's going to provide the money, who's going to provide the troops, who's going to provide the capacity to carry out this monumental act of reconstruction. At the very least, at the very beginning, you have to start with clearing 50 million tons of debris, and then putting the inhabitants of Gaza, who have gone through such extraordinary trauma over the last 2 years, into some form of dwelling and give them some form of health and food and everything else.
Indeed. I mean, a considerable amount of aid is stuck on the border, hasn't been able to get into Gaza. I mean, is your understanding that that now changes and it can now cross the border? If so, when can that start happening, do you think?
That should happen immediately. Actually, it should never have been stopped. Of course, most of the world has been pleading with the Israelis to allow food in, because there has been vast quantities of food sitting just outside Gaza that the Israelis have not allowed in, and it's been incredibly cruel. As you probably saw, just last week, the top UN official dealing with humanitarian affairs pointed out that even peanut paste, which is something that is given to children to stop them absolutely dying of starvation and their bodies automatically starting to consume their own organs, even that was being cruelly prevented. So the food is there, and the world has been pleading with Israel to let it in, and they have felt totally empowered in saying no. That is, I assume, is slightly changing now, because as part of the Trump plan, they are supposed to let food in. I'm sure many of them will find every excuse possible to slow it down.
I mean, there is, we're told, widespread disease in Gaza. There are also the remains of humans under the rubble, which means there could be more disease, more health concerns down the line. Drinking water is far from clean in many places. I mean, where does the world even start in addressing issues on this sort of a scale? I mean, this represents a massive logistical challenge, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, and we've rarely seen one. I mean, first of all, we've never seen this level of destruction with more bombs dropped than on Germany during the entire Second World War by all the Allies, in a tiny little area the size of Gaza. I mean, the level of destruction there, the number of houses destroyed, every university, virtually every hospital and clinic, the infrastructure is rubble, basically. So it is vast. I mean, nevertheless, I mean, there will be, and the Americans, because Trump is taking responsibility for it by being the chairman of this board of peace, the Americans are going to be responsible, I imagine, for trying to get the entire international community, the countries of the Gulf who are very rich, the Europeans, and everybody else. And the United Nations will need some role because it provides a level of legitimacy, however much it is being demonized by the Israelis over the last few months. The UN will have to play a role. Everybody needs to. And I think the Americans are going to have to be the ones coordinating that.
Well, of course, Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, is also, we gather, going to have an important part to play as well. I mean, given that you're in the United Kingdom and he was the former British Prime Minister, just wonder what your thoughts are on that suggestion that he be involved in this process.
Well, of course, he has a lot to live down. His role in the quartet, his role in Iraq. I mean, if it's going to happen, I think it is going to happen. I don't think there's any point particularly being negative about him. I think one needs to try to encourage him to do the right thing. So I'm very much hopeful that he will. I know there is an immense amount of skepticism towards him, and I rather understand that. But nevertheless, I think one ought to, if he's going to have that role, everybody needs to get behind him and enable him to do it in such a way that it is as constructive as possible.
I mean, obviously, we're talking about Gaza. We were saying just a moment ago, there's a real sort of humanitarian catastrophe there, famine in some areas. I mean, do aid groups typically, in your understanding, do they sort of coordinate amongst themselves to ensure there's no duplication of efforts in one area and neglect in another? I mean, how do they work things like this out, do you think?
Oh, well, they do. I mean, they have a lot of experience of doing that. There are all sorts of coordination mechanisms that are always set up. The UN takes the lead in doing that, and where it's allowed to operate. And generally, and it's not just the UN agencies that they coordinate also the multilateral agencies that are from the World Bank and the development corporations from the various countries, but also the NGOs too. So I would be expecting the UN to coordinate the humanitarian relief. I mean, there's going to be such a need. I don't think there's any real much possibility of duplicating because there isn't going to be nearly enough aid going in, but still they will be there trying to ensure that it is done in the most intelligent way possible.
So do you see the UN and UNRWA picking up where they left off? Because, of course, they haven't been able to operate as they would have liked to have done the last few months. Do you see the UN and UNRWA taking back responsibility for the humanitarian needs of the people of Gaza?
I do. I mean, we have witnessed this astonishing attempt to demonize every aspect of the UN by the Israelis over the last 2 years, partly because the UN has called them out for the very, very grave violations of international humanitarian law, which is a long way of saying war crimes, which have been sort of systematic and very, very widespread, almost since the beginning, from October 2023. More recently, specifically using the word genocide, based on a lot of very, very long thought-out consideration. Plus also calling out what does seem to have been a very planned man-made famine that has been inflicted on the people of Gaza. So the UN has been calling this out using the fact, I mean, it's quite clear they've been trying to get food in and it's not been allowed in. And all the reports suggest that there is genuinely famine inside Gaza. But now, I mean, but it will depend. Of course, the Europeans will want the UN to be involved. The countries of the Arab League will want the UN to be involved. The Israelis will not want the UN to be involved. The question is, will come down to what President Trump does as to whether he wants the UN to be involved. If it isn't, there's going to have to be a real need to sort of reinvent the wheel, frankly, and come up with some other international organization. But that will take a lot of time. That will be real duplication and would be extremely inefficient, frankly.
Yeah, and you mentioned how the UN has accused Israel of committing genocide, and a UN-backed monitor declared famine in parts of Gaza. I mean, do you see a point, I mean, obviously not in the immediate term, but do you see in the longer term perhaps a stage we reach where there are legal consequences for the Israeli leadership?
Yes, I mean, this happens everywhere whenever there are really major war crimes, and often the leaders manage to evade facing any justice at all. We saw that in Syria recently. The regime, which had committed terrible war crimes over the previous decade and beyond, fell in December, but the leaders have gone off to Moscow, and there's quite scant hope that they're going to have to pay any price. The Israelis are going to have the full protection of the Americans. So, but there's definitely going to be, it's going to be very hard for many Israelis to travel in Europe, I think. Once the people have come up with indictments, as they're going to do. Of course, what is happening, the Americans are now trying to and have heavily sanctioned the International Criminal Court, and others have done things to undermine the work of the International Court of Justice and everything else. There's this big attempt to undermine accountability for what's been going on, and that is going to continue. But nevertheless, it's going to be pretty difficult. And the fact that the Israelis are being so explicit in their war aims, which have very clearly fallen on the side of genocide, frankly. They're particular, and they've been very open in many cases as to what they're doing. They deny it's genocide, but their quotations have made it much easier for anybody who wants to go after them. And there will be people wanting to go after them, that's for sure.
Just lastly, Andrew, this is clearly a diplomatic victory for President Trump and his administration, getting the parties over the line and getting this first hurdle cleared, albeit with many more hurdles still ahead of all of us. Do you think this does boost, however, President Trump's chances of getting the Nobel Peace Prize? That'll be announced tomorrow. How do you rate his chances?
My guess is that he won't get it tomorrow, but if this deal works, he may well get it next year. Apart from anything else, the performance of a Nobel Prize is meant to be for the previous year, and certainly there's nothing much he did in 2024 that would lead one to think that he was going to get it. But if I could just quickly say what I think gives me hope of all this is that this deal addresses the biggest flaw at the heart of the Abraham Accord, which was to totally exclude and indeed humiliate the Palestinians, which led them to carry out desperate measures, and which is not to justify October 7th at all, but it's nevertheless, it was their absence from the Abraham Accords that was part of that reason. And I think this underlines the strong influence, very strong influence. There's never been as much as this, the influence that the Gulf states have over the US at the moment. And I think that has been a very positive lesson. It was what happened in Qatar. It was the Israeli attack on Qatar that really seemed to have moved Trump far more than the tens of thousands of people who have been killed in Gaza. And the fact that the Arab states felt so strongly about that and reacted so negatively, I think was very important. And I think if there's a possibility of the Gulf states continuing to play that role, then that will be very, very constructive.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you speaking to us. Andrew Gilmour, former UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Zvika Klein, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Just talk us through what your reaction was when you heard this news today. What went through your mind?
First of all, thank you for having me. I woke up this morning and I said, thank God, this is finally getting closer to an end. One of my reporters actually texted me and said, it's the first time in 2 years that I could actually breathe. So I think, it was a very positive reaction, and I think most Israelis feel the same.
We are expecting Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to arrive in Israel today. I'm not sure if they've arrived already, but given their involvement in the diplomatic process in Egypt, what sort of a welcome do you think they're going to get today?
They're very popular here in Israel, from all walks of life and from people from all political spectrums. Obviously, people who are right-wing support them, but many people on the left support them because they see them as the direct leaders or envoys of the Trump administration in charge of making this actually happen. And, there are many people in Israel that actually credit President Trump a lot more than they credit the prime minister here in Israel.
Right, so a lot of people were involved. Where would you say the buck stops? to whom do you think the people of Israel sort of direct their greatest sort of sense of gratitude for getting us to this point?
Yes, I mean, so as I said, I think really most people give Trump that credit. I was just in a hostage square in Tel Aviv a few hours ago, and there were so many Trumps so many signs in English thanking President Trump for his involvement and for his deal that he promoted and pushed forward. Obviously, there are the Netanyahu supporters that see Netanyahu as the direct responsible person for this. And I think, the truth is somewhere in between.
I mean, obviously, Prime Minister Netanyahu, even before the 7th of October 2023, was, a prime minister that not everyone supported in Israel by any means. At certain points, these last 2 years, he's looked politically vulnerable. What do you think the release of these hostages is going to do for his standing in the eyes of the Israeli people?
So I think it was really a genius political move, because there's really nowhere for him to make a mistake now. I mean, we have the guarantee that the hostages will be released, 48 individuals, 20 of them alive. This is like the main goal that most Israelis have been waiting for. And the IDF still has presence within Gaza. So it's not as if the IDF totally left that part of the region and can still potentially react if needed. So with Netanyahu's constituents, he maintains that stability, but also he broadens his support to people who may have supported him in the past and step back. Now again, they see him as someone who actually was able to bring a deal to the table, not another ceasefire for a few months. And I know, Tom, you've been covering this very closely. So it's not another ceasefire of a few weeks and then months later we're like stuck in some ceasefire. People actually see an end to this war, and that could potentially build a bloc of parties, that are more center and less to the extreme, which personally I would be happy to see.
I mean, it's going to be a few days of really mixed emotions there in Israel. I can imagine, the joy of the 20 living hostages coming home on the one hand, the deep sadness on the other hand at those who didn't come home alive. And then this other emotion of presumably, the unpalatable task as far as Israeli people are concerned of releasing some of the Palestinian prisoners who may be responsible for the losses of Israeli lives. What's the latest with regards to the list of prisoners due for release? What's been agreed?
So basically, the Israeli cabinet is meeting as we speak. So there isn't a specific list. We do know that the Nukhba terrorists, those that were involved on October 7th, are not expected to be released. And there's a number of very senior Palestinian prisoners, life sentence prisoners, who will not be released, one of them being Barghouti, one of the main symbols of the resistance to the state of Israel. So those are prisoners that the Israeli government was not willing to compromise on. But there are many terrorists who committed vicious terrorist attacks against Israelis, including women and children, in many walks of life, whether it on buses in the 90s or in coffee shops or even in people's homes. So it's a very, as you said, it's a very mixed feeling. I'll also add that, many sources I speak to have been saying that Hamas may not actually find all the bodies of the hostages, the Israeli hostages who were killed. And that's a very dramatic situation, because there may be a number of families that won't be able to actually bury their loved ones.
Right, and that is a scenario that's not impossible to imagine in a place that's been ravaged to the extent that Gaza has been, and that, presumably there are commanders and people who would know about, where hostages were being held who are no longer alive to even provide the answer. I mean, there must be a lot of unknowns with regards to the release of the hostages.
100%. So, Tom, actually, at the beginning of this war, I had a off-the-record conversation with an American diplomat who was telling me that there definitely will be certain bodies that will just never be found because of the chaos and because of the mess in Gaza. That's something that really will not be able to find. And as much as they will try, they may not be able to do it. That said, I know Israeli sources have been saying that they will, move forward to the second phase of this deal, even if those bodies are not, as long as they see that Hamas is serious in trying to locate them.
What are we hearing from Prime Minister Netanyahu's opponents and those who, particularly in his coalition, the hardline elements of his coalition, some of them threatened to pull out of the coalition in the event that a deal was struck? I mean, are they making noises today? Are they threatening to withdraw? Are they celebrating? What are we hearing from those elements?
They're definitely not celebrating. So basically there's two parties to the extreme right of the Likud, and that's the Religious Zionist Party of Bezalel Smotrich and the Otzma Yehudit Party headed by Itamar Ben-Gvir. Those parties are at the moment showing signs that they would not support this deal. I know there are people in these parties that actually said that they would support for the deal. But it's not such a big deal since the opposition said that in a case where the coalition would not be able to get this deal passed, they would support the government and vote, from outside the government, vote in order for it to pass. So in any case, this government will be able to implement the deal. Whether the government will be able to continue the way it is at the moment, that's questionable.
And just lastly, Zvika, I mean, one piece of news that I was just going to ask you to help us unpack a little bit. President Trump says he might go to the Middle East this weekend, so Saturday or Sunday. Israel might be on the itinerary. It'd be hard to imagine Israel not being on the itinerary. But what do you know about that plan? Have you heard anything there with regards to it?
So there have been reports here in Israel already, including Israeli President Isaac Herzog, saying that President Trump is expected to visit Israel on Sunday. We haven't yet seen official statements from the American side, but as this is moving forward and as the deal is actually becoming reality, that pretty much seems like he really wants to be there when it happens, because he was the one that made it move forward and he wants to take credit for it, rightfully so.
Okay, well, we'll have to keep an eye on how developments unfold. Meanwhile, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Zvika Klein, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get perspective now from Ashley Waxman Bakshi, who is the cousin of former Israeli hostage Agam Berger, who was held captive until January of this year and has now been released. Ashley, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. I mean, your cousin's been free now for 8 months. I just want to know how Agam is getting on. How's your family?
We're doing well. She's doing well, slowly but surely. But there has been, she's been waiting for all the hostages to be released in order to fully recover. It's very difficult for the released hostages. There's this feeling of guilt of leaving those, behind. And an entire country can't move on until they're all home. So we're feeling really, really happy now that, that this deal finally happened. And the whole country just feels so positive right now. We know that there are difficult days ahead. We will be receiving bodies, which is difficult. It's mourning all over again, the massacre of October 7th. And we do understand the incredible cost that comes with this, the cost of not only our soldiers that we've lost, but also the terrorists that will be released from prison, especially those with blood on their hands, all the way back going, from the first and second intifadas. So we understand the immense cost, but we are a nation that that celebrates life, and we want to see our people home.
Just tell us, Ashley, where were you when you got the news that this agreement had been reached? What happened at that moment?
So I've obviously been following the news very closely over the past 10 days since President Trump's statement. And so we've been waiting, anxiously. And I have, my little headphone with me, and I'm constantly listening to the news, glued to it. And it was last night at, I believe, around 12 o'clock at night that I saw a tweet saying that it could happen within the next day or two. And then sure enough, I listened to the news and they were saying that it was going to happen tonight. So I waited, and I was awake pretty much all night waiting for, that moment to know that it was signed, and waiting to hear President Trump had released his statement to social media, because apparently that's how, we get things done today. That's how we release news to the world. It's through social media. So I've just been glued and it's just like everyone else. I mean, I'm sure I'm not special on this.
It sounds like you were sort of stunned, but weirdly enough, not surprised, almost as if you felt like the announcement was imminent.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a few things happened over the past, month, you could say, that kind of made everything align to finally make this come to fruition, this agreement. I think not only, the cynical aspects of the Nobel Prize being announced and all of that, but also I do think that the Israeli attack on the Hamas leadership in Qatar played an immense role in bringing this to fruition. I think it was very easy for the Hamas leadership sitting comfortably in Qatar to quote unquote sacrifice, the people of Gaza in their fight. But once they realized that they were not safe, even on Qatari soil, I think that's kind of what pushed them to this negotiation. And then obviously Trump understanding that Turkey has an immense role to play in mediation. I think it is a shame that Turkey did not play a stronger role from the beginning. They should have been involved. So I think Trump really understanding the geopolitics brought everything together. And let's not forget our military success. So the soldiers that have been fighting for 2 years, who have been sacrificing their lives, the reservists who have been sacrificing their jobs, their careers, their families, putting everything aside and being there for two years. I think all of this kind of came to play in bringing this agreement. And I think we all kind of felt a tectonic shift after all of this started to happen. And then hearing President Trump with Netanyahu visiting him just a few weeks ago in the White House, I think we were all expecting some good news. But we were, there have been many, many times in the past that we thought a ceasefire would come and then it fell through. I think it's been 19 times that Hamas said no to the ceasefire. And I just felt like, for me personally, also with the IDF going into Gaza City in, that final stronghold of Hamas, I felt like it was finally time for Hamas to realize that it needed to lay down its weapons and to let our people go.
What do you think the whole handover process is going to be like when the hostages do get back to Israel? I mean, obviously, as we've been saying, it's going to be a lot of mixed emotions. Some will be coming back alive and some will be obviously dead. And that's going to be extremely sad for their families. But what sort of form do you think the return will take? Do you think they'll all come at once? Do you think there'll be a sort of a ceremony? Do you think it'll be a very private affair? What does something like that look like?
Well, I hope we don't see what we saw last time, especially with the release of my hostage Agam in January and the previous deal where 33 came home, where Hamas, paraded them and showcased them and did this whole theatrical thing, brought, civilians and children came to watch this spectacle of letting the hostages go. I really hope we don't see that. I don't believe we will see it this time. I think that this time Hamas understands that it is coming It is coming to this ceasefire deal at a loss. It no longer has the leverage. It no longer has the hostages. It's giving them up. It understands that October 7th was not worth it. It understands that it will no longer govern Gaza. It will lose its credibility. It's lost its credibility amongst the Arab world. This is the time where I'd like to also say a big thank you to the Arab world who has come and taken part and understands that Hamas cannot cannot be a part of a future peace process. We cannot have peace with Hamas there. I think the Arab world really understands what that ideology looks like, whereas many places in the Western world, as we've seen with Emmanuel Macron and with Carney in Canada, all these leaders, appeasing terrorism. I think in the Middle East, we understand that that's not the way you get things done. That's not the way you have peace. You have peace through strength. That is how we have been able to have peace with these countries such as Jordan and Egypt and then the UAE and Morocco and Bahrain. And we celebrate that. So I think that now that the world is really, made Hamas understand that it does not have that power and that leverage that it had a year ago or 2 years ago when it took all 251 hostages, I don't think we will see the same spectacle. Now, as for your question of how we will receive them in Israel, our hospitals are already preparing to receive hostages in far worse condition than the previous time. We saw the videos of how our hostages, specifically, for example, Aviatal, we've seen them, digging their own graves, starving. We know that they're sick. We know some of them have lost vision. We know some of them have we've heard of these conditions. And so the hospitals are really preparing for a worse situation. I hope to see all 22 of them come out on their feet, of the ones alive. The ones that will come back not alive, from what I understand, all the families know that their loved ones are not going to be the ones coming back alive. And so they're prepared for it. And so it is going to be bittersweet. But for us in the Jewish religion, in our faith, it's very important for us to bring the dead to a proper burial. And so it will allow us to move forward. And that's what we want as a nation. We want to move forward. We didn't ask for this war. We didn't call for this war. We regret this war. We want our economy, to go back to focusing on economy, to go back to focusing on Abraham Accords, to strengthening the Middle East. That's really where we want to go from here.
And actually, just going back to where we sort of started talking about your cousin, she was held captive for 482 days. I'm just wondering, what was her journey like readapting to what you might term sort of normal life?
So the first few months, I would say, she kind of, tried to stay out of the spotlight. Agam is a very private person. And so sometimes, we've seen many hostages go out and be very vocal, social media or going speaking or writing books. My cousin Agam, she did not want to be famous. She did not want to be well known. She did not plan to be kidnapped. So she kind of went back to being, a private person, yet it was still very, very important for her to continue to advocate for the rest of the hostages to come home. Agam plays the violin, so she hasn't felt comfortable yet to, speak or share her story, but she goes around to Jewish communities and strengthens them by playing music on her violin. And I think that's been a very big part of her therapy and just getting back to who she is and, normal life. But she really is doing very well. And, I only know from what she's shared, and, you don't push, you don't want to ask too many questions because you don't want to put them in a place where they feel uncomfortable. You don't want to, probe. And so I've heard stories and she's shared things, but I'm sure there are things that she hasn't shared yet. And it will take time. She's very young. She's 20 years old. So it will take a long time. And I'm sure that, the healing process will now just get easier, knowing that the war is behind us, the hostages are home. And again, as a country, we can move forward.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you speaking to us. Thank you very much indeed, Ashley Waxman Bakshi. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.